"Oh, sorry, I accidentally dropped your laptop in the pool," my sister said after I refused to lend her $18,000. Dad added, "It's just an accident." I didn't argue. That night, I made a few calls and changed a few passwords. But at 7 a.m., she woke up to something she never saw coming. I, 32M, watched my sister destroy my laptop. What happened at 7 a.m. changed everything. The water rippled outward in perfect circles as my laptop sank to the bottom of the pool, the glowing screen fading to black somewhere around 4 feet down. My sister stood there on the deck, her hand still extended from the throw, that familiar smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. The same smirk she'd worn since we were kids, the one that said she knew she'd get away with it. Dad was already moving toward her, not to scold, but to comfort. He asked her if she was okay, if she'd hurt her wrist. Not a single glance toward the pool where 3 years of work data was currently drowning. When I started toward the house to grab the pool skimmer, Dad finally acknowledged me. He said it was just an accident, that I shouldn't make a big deal out of it, that I could always buy another laptop. Just like that. As if $1,800 of hardware and irreplaceable project files were equivalent to a dropped coffee mug. This wasn't about the laptop, though. Not really. This was about the conversation we'd had 20 minutes earlier, the one where my sister asked me for $18,000 to cover what she called a temporary cash flow problem. The same sister who'd borrowed $12,000 3 years ago for a business venture that never materialized. The same one who still owed our younger brother $5,000 from last Christmas. When I told her I couldn't do it, that I was saving for a down payment on a house, her face had transformed. The smile vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. She told me I was selfish, that family was supposed to help family, that I'd always been Dad's favorite anyway, so what did I need the money for? I didn't argue about the laptop, didn't raise my voice, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I just walked inside, water dripping from the device I'd fished out with the skimmer, knowing it was already dead. The rice trick was a myth anyway, and the liquid damage was catastrophic. I set it on the counter, watched the water pool beneath it, and made a decision. The thing about being the family IT guy is that everyone trusts you with their passwords. Everyone asks you to fix their phones, set up their new tablets, recover their forgotten logins. My sister had asked me to help her with her online boutique about 8 months back, something about the website crashing and losing customer orders. I'd spent 2 weekends rebuilding her entire e-commerce platform, integrating her payment processors, setting up her business accounts. She'd given me full administrative access to everything and never thought to change it after I was done. Why would she? I was family. Family helps family, right? That night, I sat in my bedroom with my old backup laptop, the slow one I'd kept meaning to donate. The house was quiet. Dad had gone to bed early, and my sister was out celebrating her birthday weekend with friends, probably telling them about her brother who was too cheap to help her out, who deserved what he got. I opened my browser and started working. Her boutique had been doing well lately, much better than she'd let on when asking for money. I could see the revenue reports, the transaction histories. She was pulling in almost $30,000 a month in sales, with profit margins around 40%. The temporary cash flow problem was actually a gambling debt, based on the payment patterns I could see going to various offshore betting sites from her connected accounts. She'd burned through her profits, and then some, and now she needed someone to bail her out. Again, I didn't delete anything, didn't sabotage her business or steal from her, but I did change every single password she had. Email, boutique admin panel, social media accounts she used for marketing, payment processors, everything. I set up new recovery options that went to an email address she didn't know existed. Then I enabled 2-factor authentication on everything, tied to a phone number she couldn't access. I made it all completely, impenetrably locked. But that wasn't the part that would hurt. The part that would hurt was the timing. See, my sister had a major product launch scheduled for 7 a.m. the next morning. She'd been promoting it for weeks, some collaboration with a minor Instagram influencer that was supposed to be her big breakthrough. Limited quantity items, everything pre-scheduled to go live automatically. She'd shown me the projected numbers, gushing about how this could triple her monthly revenue. The inventory alone had cost her $25,000, money she'd somehow scraped together despite being $18,000 in the hole. I had a pretty good idea where that money had come from, and it probably involved credit cards she couldn't afford. At 11 p.m., I sent her business email account an automated message about suspicious activity and a required password reset for security purposes. The kind of official-looking email that most people ignore until it's too late. Then I went to bed. My phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. My sister. I let it go to voicemail. Another call at 6:51. Then 6:53. Then Dad was knocking on my door, saying my sister needed help with something urgent, something about her website. I took my time getting dressed, brushing my teeth, checked my email, made coffee. When I finally walked into the living room at 7:15, my sister was in full panic mode, her laptop open on the coffee table, her phone pressed to her ear. She was trying to reach customer support for her hosting company. But of course, they had a 2-hour wait time on Saturday mornings. Her launch had started 15 minutes ago, and she was locked out of everything. Customers were commenting on her social media posts, asking where the products were, why the links weren't working. Except she couldn't even see those comments because she couldn't log into her social media. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, something like hope flickered across her face. She hung up the phone and asked if I could help her, said everything was locked, that nothing was working. Dad chimed in immediately, saying of course I'd help, that this was important, that I shouldn't let yesterday's accident get in the way of family. I sipped my coffee and asked what was wrong. She explained it all in a rush. The passwords not working, the recovery emails going nowhere, the two-factor authentication she didn't set up but was somehow active. I set down my mug and looked at her laptop screen, made a show of trying a few things. Then I leaned back and said I wasn't sure what happened, but it looked like someone had completely locked her out of her accounts. Probably a security breach. These things happen sometimes when people use the same passwords across multiple platforms, especially if they'd been visiting unsecured sites. Gambling sites, for instance, were notorious for security issues. Her face went white. Dad asked what I meant by gambling sites, his tone sharp. I shrugged and said I was just giving an example, that I'd read an article about it recently. My sister's hands were shaking now, whether from panic or rage, I couldn't quite tell. She asked if I could fix it, if there was anything I could do. I told her I could try, but these kinds of lockouts were complex. It might take days to sort out, maybe a week. I'd need to contact each platform individually, verify her identity, potentially rebuild some of the security infrastructure. The color was draining from her face as the implications sank in. Days meant her launch window was gone. The influencer had already posted about the collaboration to her 200,000 followers. Customers were waiting. Inventory was sitting in her garage, paid for but unsellable. And every hour that passed was another hour of angry comments, lost sales, damaged reputation. She asked me to please try, said she'd do anything. Dad added that I should do whatever I could to help, that we'd all get past yesterday's unfortunate incident. I finished my coffee and said I'd see what I could do, but I'd need her to write down every account she needed access to, every platform, every password she could remember. As I walked back to my room, I heard her starting to cry. Over the next 3 hours, I made a very elaborate show of trying to help. I'd call out questions from my room, ask her for information, have her try various recovery options that I knew wouldn't work. Dad brought me lunch, thanked me for being the bigger person. My sister oscillated between apologetic and desperate, then briefly angry when she suggested maybe I'd done something to cause this, before collapsing back into panic when she realized alienating me further wouldn't help. By noon, she'd lost approximately $40,000 in potential launch revenue, based on her projections. Her influencer partner was posting confused updates, trying to cover for the technical difficulties. The comments were getting nasty, people accusing her of running a scam, of false advertising. Her business reputation, carefully built over 2 years, was crumbling in real time. At 12:30, I walked back into the living room and sat down across from her. I said I thought I'd figured out what happened, that it looked like someone with administrative access had systematically locked her out. She stared at me, comprehension slowly dawning. Dad asked what that meant, who had administrative access. I said, well, typically it would be whoever set up and maintained the systems. Someone who knew all the back-end architecture. My sister's voice was barely a whisper when she asked if it was me. I didn't answer directly. Instead, I asked her if she remembered what she'd done yesterday. She said she'd apologized for the laptop, that it was an accident. I asked Dad if he remembered telling me it was no big deal, just an accident, that I could buy another one. He started to say something about proportional responses, about this being too much if I'd really done what she was suggesting. I cut him off, told him the laptop had contained the complete technical documentation for a project I'd been bidding on, something that could have landed me a contract worth $60,000. The proposal was due Monday. The files weren't backed up to the cloud because they contained proprietary client information. That laptop wasn't just hardware. It was my career leverage, my financial future. And she'd thrown it in the pool because I wouldn't enable her gambling addiction. Dad's expression shifted. My sister tried to say she didn't know, that she hadn't realized. I asked her if she'd bothered to ask before she destroyed it. Asked if she'd considered for even a moment that there might be consequences for her actions. She was crying fully now, saying she was sorry, that she'd pay for a new laptop, that she needed her accounts back. I stood up and told her I'd think about it, that I needed to consider whether family should help family, especially when that family had cost me a contract worth more than triple what she'd asked to borrow. I mentioned that my lawyer friend had already looked into the situation and that intentional destruction of property over a certain value threshold could potentially be prosecuted as a felony, especially if it could be proven that business losses resulted from the destruction. The laptop and the lost contract together exceeded $70,000 in damages. Her face went gray. Dad started to bluster about me not actually pursuing legal action against my own sister, about this getting out of hand. I said I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, that I needed some time to think about the right path forward. Maybe a few days, maybe a week, long enough to really consider all my options. I let her sit with that for about an hour. Let her feel what it was like to watch something you'd built start to collapse, to be completely powerless to stop it. Let Dad stew in the realization that his dismissal of the laptop incident had contributed to a much larger problem. Then I went back to my room and started the recovery process. By 3 p.m., I'd restored access to her primary email account. Told her I'd managed to break through some of the security, but it was a complex process and I'd need to do it carefully to avoid triggering permanent lockouts. She thanked me about a dozen times. Dad patted my shoulder, said he knew I'd do the right thing. I said nothing. At 5 p.m., I restored her boutique admin access. She immediately started trying to salvage what she could of the launch, posting apologies and explanations, offering discount codes to angry customers. The damage was already done, though. Most of the hype had evaporated. The influencer had moved on to posting about other things. She might recover 20% of the projected revenue if she was lucky. At 8 p.m., I gave her back the social media accounts. She worked through the night trying to do damage control, responding to comments, managing her brand image. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. Sunday morning, I came downstairs to find her asleep on the couch, her laptop still open, order confirmation emails loading one by one. She'd managed to convert maybe $8,000 in sales, less than a fifth of what she'd expected. Dad was making breakfast, looking tired and older than usual. He asked me to sit down, said we needed to talk about what had happened. I poured myself juice and waited. He started by saying he understood I was angry about the laptop, that he should have taken it more seriously. Then he said what I'd done to my sister was extreme, that it had cost her a lot of money and damage to her business. I asked him if he thought it was more or less extreme than destroying someone's property in retaliation for a denied loan. He was quiet for a moment, then asked what I wanted from this situation. I told him I wanted 3 things. First, I wanted Dad to acknowledge that my sister had deliberately destroyed my laptop, that it wasn't an accident, and that he'd enabled her behavior by dismissing it. Second, I wanted my sister to pay for a replacement laptop and cover the cost of data recovery attempts, even though they'd likely fail. Third, I wanted her to get help for the gambling problem, real help, before she destroyed her business and her life. Dad asked how I knew about the gambling. I pulled up my phone and showed him the transaction histories I'd seen, months of escalating bets, the pattern of someone spiraling into addiction. Tens of thousands of dollars funneled away from her supposedly struggling business into offshore betting accounts. He sat down heavily. My sister woke up around then, probably hearing our voices. She looked exhausted, defeated. I told her the same 3 things I told Dad. She started to argue about the gambling, then seemed to deflate. She admitted she'd been having a problem, that it had gotten out of control, that she'd been planning to use the $18,000 to cover her debts and get clean. I pointed out that giving an addict money to solve their addiction-caused problems wasn't help, it was enabling. She asked if I'd restore the rest of her accounts. I said I would. on the condition that she scheduled an appointment with a counselor who specialized in gambling addiction within the week, and that she agreed to let me see proof of attendance. Also, that she paid for the laptop replacement up front before she got full access back, and that she actually apologized, for what she'd done. She agreed to all of it. Apologized with what seemed like genuine remorse, though whether it was for her actions or their consequences, I couldn't quite tell. Dad wrote me a check for the laptop, said he'd make sure she paid him back, and followed through on the counseling. I restored her accounts that afternoon. The weeks that followed were tense. My sister did follow through, started seeing a counselor, cut herself off from the gambling sites. Her business survived, though the failed launch had seriously damaged her growth trajectory. She'd need months to rebuild the momentum she'd lost. Dad was more careful about playing favorites, more willing to hold her accountable. As for me, I never did recover the files from the laptop. The contract went to a competitor, and I lost out on what would have been a major career step. But I did learn something valuable about boundaries, about the difference between family loyalty and enabling dysfunction. And I learned that sometimes the right response to being wronged isn't to explode, isn't to match their cruelty, but to let them feel the weight of their own actions, reflected back at them with precision. My sister and I don't talk much these days. Things are cordial at family dinners, but there's a distance that wasn't there before. She knows what I'm capable of when pushed, and I know that her contrition was born more from consequence than genuine change. Maybe that'll shift over time. Maybe it won't. But every time I open my new laptop, the one Dad's check paid for, I think about that morning. About the panic in her voice, the desperation. About how quickly certainty can turn to chaos when someone pulls away the safety net you didn't realize you were standing on. And I remember that accidents, as Dad said, can go both ways. Sometimes karma needs a little help with the timing.